The sun bled across the horizon, painting the desolate Nevada airfield in hues of burnt orange and bruised purple. Dust, fine as ancient regrets, spiraled in the dying breeze, dancing around a lone figure who stood silhouetted against the vast, unforgiving sky. This was Elijah, a mechanic forged in the roar of engines and the sharp tang of aviation fuel. His hands, calloused and perpetually stained with grease, were a testament to a lifetime spent coaxing life back into broken wings and silenced turbines. His eyes, though, held a quiet, almost melancholic wisdom, reflecting the countless hours he'd poured into machines that roared, vibrated, and sometimes simply died. Before him, a hulking shadow clawed at the fading light, the skeletal remains of what was once a proud helicopter. Its once gleaming frame was now a monument to forgotten glory, its wings clipped like a bird shackled to the earth, its rotor blades still and lifeless. It was a wreck, a testament to a catastrophic failure, a whisper of a forgotten scream. Elijah traced a finger over the cold, scarred metal, a silent conversation passing between man and machine, a language understood only by those who shared the same grit and determination. He felt the profound weight of its brokenness, not just the tangle of severed wires and twisted steel, but a spirit crushed, a purpose lost. To anyone else, it was scrap, a salvage operation, perhaps, or a training aid for junior mechanics to practice stripping down. A lost cause, certainly. He'd heard the whispers, low and persistent, like the desert wind through dry bones. Impossible, they'd muttered, shaking their heads with the certainty of those who only saw what was, never what could be. Too risky, his colleagues had warned, their voices laced with a blend of concern and thinly veiled ridicule. They saw a machine that had failed, a project destined for the junkyard, an ambition that would only lead to a dead end. But Elijah saw something else entirely. He saw potential, a defiant spark within the wreckage, a challenge to reclaim its very essence. His resolve, a quiet, unyielding force, hardened with each dismissive glance, each cautionary word. He knew the odds. He knew the established rules, the engineering principles etched in stone, the conventional wisdom that declared this helicopter beyond repair, beyond flight. Yet, a question, primal and persistent, gnawed at him, refusing to be silenced. What if the greatest strength wasn't in raw, unadulterated power, the kind that gleamed from the polished chrome of a brand-new jet, but in the sheer ingenuity that dared to defy every perceived limitation? What if the true measure of greatness lay not in starting perfect, but in the audacious spirit that could resurrect the broken? Imagine for a moment a machine so utterly crippled, so fundamentally flawed, that the very idea of it taking flight was absurd. Now, picture that same broken machine, not merely flying again, but soaring higher, faster, with a defiant grace that shamed its perfect counterparts. What if, under the guidance of a visionary who saw beyond the damage, who dared to rewrite the rules of physics and engineering, this forgotten helicopter could not only reclaim the sky, but could leave even the most advanced, most technologically superior aircraft in its dust? This wasn't just about fixing a machine. It was about proving that the human spirit, when fused with the heart of steel and oil, could achieve the impossible, could make the crippled humiliate the mighty. The challenge was set, not just for the machine, but for the very idea of what was possible. But to understand the sheer audacity of this challenge, you first had to look into the abyss of its failure. This was no simple mechanical fault, no clean break that could be mended with a new part and a torque wrench. This was a systemic crippling, a mechanical death sentence. The helicopter was a runner with not just broken legs, but shattered femurs, a severed spine. Its main rotor mast, the very heart of its ability to defy gravity, was bent at an angle that defied all engineering tolerances. The tail boom, crucial for stability, was twisted, its structural integrity a ghost of what it once was. Its avionics were a fried, silent graveyard of circuits and wires, a complex nervous system that had been electrocuted into oblivion. Every manual, every textbook, every seasoned engineer would have taken one look and signed the decommissioning papers. It was a corpse. Yet, where others saw an ending, Elijah saw a radical new beginning. His vision wasn't about restoration, it was about reinvention. He wasn't trying to heal the machine back to its original state. That was impossible. Instead, he conceived a technique so risky, so contrary to established principles, that it bordered on madness. He decided to embrace the damage, to leverage the flaws. He wasn't a doctor setting a bone. He was a radical surgeon teaching a body to walk with a limp so pronounced it became a new, unpredictable form of dance. His idea was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. He would reroute the hydraulic systems, not to correct the compromised tail boom, but to use its inherent instability. He would recalibrate the damaged rotor mast, not to fly straight, but to generate a unique, asymmetric lift that, in theory, could allow for maneuvers no standard helicopter could ever perform. He was turning its greatest weaknesses into its most formidable weapons. The hangar, once a place of collaborative noise, became a chamber of whispers and scorn. Elijah worked alone, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, long after the other crews had gone home. His superiors saw his project not as innovation, but as a dangerous obsession, a waste of resources on a lost cause. "You're going to get yourself killed, Elijah," his chief engineer warned, his voice a low growl of frustration. "And you'll take our safety record with you." Younger pilots would walk by, shaking their heads, their faces a mixture of pity and condescension. They saw an old man playing with a dead toy, refusing to accept the inevitable. Each doubt, each threat to his career, was like another turn of a screw, tightening the pressure until it was almost unbearable. Yet through it all, Elijah worked, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the broken machine began to respond. A single gauge flickered to life. A hydraulic line held pressure for a few seconds longer than before. The helicopter, once a cold, lifeless shell, seemed to be drawing breath, sensing the unwavering conviction of the man who refused to let it die. Through weeks of painstaking labor, the helicopter was reborn. It was a Frankenstein's monster of aviation, patched with unconventional solutions and held together by a madman's faith. Elijah repurposed parts from 3 different decommissioned aircraft, weaving them into the broken frame. He didn't hide the scars. He reinforced them, giving the machine a new, defiant character. It was no longer just a serial number. He took a grease pencil and, on a piece of salvaged aluminum riveted to the cockpit door, he scrawled a single word: Phoenix. It was a machine forged in fire, rising not from ashes, but from the very wreckage that was meant to be its tomb. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't pretty, but it was formidable in a way no one could comprehend. And then the adversary arrived. It was the latest in military aviation, a sleek, dagger-like jet designed for one thing: absolute dominance. It moved with an arrogant grace, its engines a low, confident hum that promised overwhelming power. They called it the Raptor, and it was the embodiment of conventional wisdom, a flawless, technologically superior Titan, unchallenged and untouchable. Its ground crew polished its fuselage until it gleamed like a dark mirror, and its pilots walked with the easy swagger of men who had never known defeat. They would glance over at Elijah's hangar, at the misshapen silhouette of the phoenix, and a smirk would cross their lips. To them, it was a joke, a relic from a bygone era being given its last rites by a sentimental old fool. The gauntlet was thrown not in a formal challenge, but in a moment of sheer hubris. During a morning briefing, the Raptor's lead pilot, a young hotshot with more medals than years of experience, made a public joke about a charity race for Elijah's junkyard project. The room filled with laughter. But Elijah, standing silently in the back, didn't flinch. He simply met the pilot's gaze and nodded. The challenge was accepted. The base commander, seeing a chance to settle the growing tension and perhaps teach Elijah a lesson in humility, made it official, a one-on-one contest. A complex course designed to test both speed and agility, a track that heavily favored the jet's raw power. The stakes were suddenly immense. It was no longer about a personal project. It was about Elijah's reputation, the Phoenix's honor, and the very soul of ingenuity against the cold, hard fact of brute force. As the day of the showdown approached, a palpable tension settled over the airfield, thick and heavy as the desert heat. The quiet hum of the Phoenix's modified engines was a strange, defiant prayer against the deafening roar of the Raptor, a roar that promised nothing but humiliation. The air itself seemed to thicken, heavy with the unspoken challenge. Every glance exchanged, every casual remark was laced with anticipation. The airfield, usually a symphony of mechanical hums and distant rumbles, now pulsed with a different kind of energy, a charged silence that vibrated just beneath the surface, threatening to erupt. News crews, drawn by the audacity of the spectacle, set up their cameras, their lenses glinting like hungry eyes, eager to capture the inevitable humiliation of the old fool and his broken bird. Elijah, oblivious to the media circus, moved with the quiet grace of a man who understood steel better than people. His hands, though still bearing the marks of 1,000 battles with stubborn bolts and corroded wiring, now moved with a surgeon's precision. He meticulously checked every last rivet on the Phoenix, every hydraulic line, every recalibrated sensor. He wasn't just inspecting, he was communing. He ran his palm over the patched fuselage, feeling the warmth of the engine, a strange, defiant heartbeat beneath his touch. The Phoenix wasn't just a machine to him. It was a living extension of his will, a testament to his belief that spirit could overcome circumstance. He'd spent countless nights, fueled by stale coffee and an unshakable conviction, coaxing life back into its mangled frame. He'd whispered promises to it, assurances that its brokenness was not an end, but a radical new beginning. The helicopter, a grotesque beauty of repurposed parts and audacious engineering, stood ready. Its main rotor, once bent and deemed irreparable, now spun with an almost imperceptible wobble, a calculated imperfection that was central to Elijah's risky technique. The tail boom, still visibly twisted, had been fitted with a series of counter-rotating vanes, not to straighten it, but to exploit its inherent instability, turning a weakness into a dynamic advantage. It looked like something built in a desert junkyard, a defiant contraption of metal and sheer stubbornness. Yet there was an undeniable, raw power humming within its unconventional structure. It didn't gleam like the Raptor. It snarled, a creature of grit and defiance. Across the tarmac, the Raptor stretched like a predator, its polished surfaces reflecting the harsh Nevada sun. Its twin engines thrummed a deep, guttural growl, a sound that spoke of unbridled speed and effortless dominance. Its ground crew, immaculate in their matching jumpsuits, moved with an almost ceremonial reverence, wiping away phantom dust, adjusting perfectly aligned panels. The lead pilot, Captain Thorne, a man whose ego was as finely tuned as his jet, watched Elijah with a condescending smile. He'd already envisioned the headlines. Cutting-edge jet dominates relic. Maverick mechanic taught a lesson. He saw a broken toy, not a challenge. His co-pilot chuckled, pointing to the Phoenix's patched-up tail. "Looks like something out of a Mad Max movie," he quipped, and the crew around them joined in the easy laughter. They were so confident in their technological superiority, so certain of the outcome, that the race felt like a mere formality, a public execution of Elijah's folly. The course itself was a cruel masterpiece of design, stretching for miles across the rugged desert landscape. It began with a long, straightaway dash, a perfect arena for the Raptor to unleash its supersonic fury. Then came a series of tightly banked turns around desert mesas, followed by a treacherous, low-altitude slalom through a canyon, culminating in a final high-speed sprint to the finish line. Every segment was meticulously crafted to highlight the jet's raw speed and agility, and to expose the helicopter's inherent limitations. A helicopter, with its slower top speed and less precise handling at high velocities, was supposed to be utterly outmatched. The odds were so stacked against Elijah that betting pools on base had given the Phoenix a 1,000,000-to-1 chance. But Elijah had studied the course with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He saw not just obstacles, but opportunities. The long straightaways were indeed a disadvantage, but the tight turns, the canyon slalom, these were where his risky technique could shine. His asymmetric lift system, designed to intentionally unbalance the Phoenix, would allow for radical, almost impossible changes in direction, far beyond what a conventional helicopter could achieve. And the twisted tail boom, once a flaw, now gave him an unpredictable yaw control that could be leveraged for unexpected bursts of agility. He wasn't trying to beat the jet at its own game. He was bringing an entirely new game to the table. He was a chess master seeing 3 moves ahead, while his opponent was still focused on the opening pawn exchange. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt, the tension became almost unbearable. The roar of the Raptor's engines, now fully engaged, vibrated through the ground, rattling the bones of every spectator. The Phoenix, in stark contrast, emitted a high-pitched, almost alien whine, a sound that spoke of immense, contained power, barely restrained. Ground crews scrambled, clearing the runway, the air thick with the smell of jet fuel and anticipation. Elijah climbed into the cockpit of the Phoenix, his face a mask of grim determination. He strapped himself in, his hands finding the familiar controls, worn smooth by years of service. He ran a systems check, the old gauges flickering to life, displaying readings that would make any conventional pilot blanch. But Elijah knew his machine. He knew its quirks, its defiant heart. Captain Thorne, a confident smirk still plastered on his face, gave a thumbs up from the cockpit of the Raptor. He was ready to teach the old man a lesson. The official in the control tower raised his flag, a single, stark signal against the darkening sky. The crowd held its breath. The moment of truth, weeks in the making, was finally here. The air crackled with raw, unadulterated energy, a silent scream before the storm. Then silence. A heavy, suffocating blanket that swallowed the crowd's collective gasp, the distant hum of the Raptor, and even the frantic beating of Elijah's own heart. The flag dropped. A primal roar ripped through the desert air. The Raptor, a black arrow loosed from a Titan's bow, surged forward. Its twin engines, a symphony of brute force, ignited the tarmac in a blinding flash, pushing the sleek jet down the runway with impossible velocity. In mere seconds, it was a blur, a shimmering mirage of speed, eating up the asphalt as if the ground itself was yielding to its will. Captain Thorne, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, felt the familiar surge of G-forces pressing him back into his seat, the world outside becoming a streaky canvas of speed. This was what he knew, what he was trained for: overwhelming, undeniable power. The crowd erupted, a wave of cheers and shouts washing over the airfield, confirming what everyone already knew. The race was over before it had truly begun. But then a different sound, a high-pitched, metallic shriek, like a wounded beast finding its voice. The Phoenix, a grotesque contraption of patched metal and exposed wiring, seemed to convulse. Its main rotor, instead of a smooth, accelerating blur, spun with an uneven, almost violent rhythm, a calculated imperfection that sent shivers down the spines of the onlookers. It didn't glide. It clawed at the air, its frame shuddering, rattling, as if fighting against its own inherent brokenness. Elijah wrestled the controls, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched. Every fiber of his being was focused on this moment, on coaxing the mangled machine to defy its own physics. The risky technique was in full effect, pushing the airframe to its absolute limits, forcing an asymmetric lift that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The Phoenix didn't take off. It tore itself from the earth, a defiant scream against the laws of aerodynamics, leaving a trail of dust and disbelief in its wake. The jet was already a speck on the horizon, a vapor trail etching its arrogance into the clear Nevada sky. Captain Thorne banked smoothly, effortlessly, around the first mesa, a maneuver performed with the casual grace of a predator toying with its prey. He glanced at his instruments, a perfect flight path, optimal speed. He imagined Elijah, struggling in his patched-up relic, probably still lumbering off the runway. The thought brought another smug smile. This wasn't a competition, it was a demonstration. A clear message that technology, unburdened by a sentimentality, always won. Meanwhile, the Phoenix, a struggling underdog, was just reaching the first turn. Its speed was a fraction of the jet's, its ascent far more labored. But as it approached the sheer rock face of the mesa, Elijah didn't attempt a gentle, conventional turn. Instead, he pushed the limits of his radical re-engineering. He engaged the rerouted hydraulic systems, forcing the twisted tail boom to act as a pivot, not a stabilizer. The helicopter didn't bank. It snapped around the corner, a violent, almost instantaneous change in direction that defied its bulky frame. The asymmetric lift, designed to create an intentional imbalance, allowed for a centrifugal force that slingshot the Phoenix around the obstacle with an unnerving, almost reckless agility. It was ugly. It was terrifying, but it was fast. Faster than any helicopter of its size had a right to be in such a tight turn. The crowd, which had initially roared for the jet, now watched in stunned silence. Their cheers had died in their throats, replaced by a collective murmur of disbelief. They saw the Phoenix, not graceful, not elegant, but raw, visceral, and utterly unpredictable. It wasn't flying, it was fighting the air, wrestling with gravity, and winning through sheer audacious defiance. The jet was a sleek bullet. The Phoenix was a broken, desperate hummingbird, buzzing with an impossible energy. Captain Thorne, rounding the second mesa, checked his radar. He expected a dot, far behind, barely moving. Instead, a small, stubborn blip was visible closer than it had any right to be. He frowned, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Had the old man actually managed to get that thing airborne? It was irrelevant. The straightaway was coming, the domain of the jet, where raw horsepower would crush any lingering illusion of competition. As the Phoenix cleared the tight turns, it entered the long, exposed straight away. This was the jet's territory, where its speed advantage was undeniable. Elijah felt the helicopter strain, its modified engines screaming under the immense pressure. He knew he couldn't match the jet here. He wasn't trying to. His strategy was a game of chess, not a drag race. He needed to conserve what little advantage he gained in the turns, preparing for the next phase of the course, the treacherous canyon slalom. He pushed the Phoenix to its modified limits, the airframe vibrating violently, the controls fighting him every inch of the way. It was a brutal dance, a constant negotiation between man and machine, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest leaps forward come not from perfection, but from the audacious exploitation of imperfection. The Raptor, having completed the straightaway, was now diving into the canyon, a narrow, winding chute of red rock that demanded precision and agility. Captain Thorne expertly threaded the needle, his jet a blur between the jagged walls. He was a master of his craft, and this was his stage. He smiled grimly, imagining the helicopter trying to navigate this maze. It would be a slow, agonizing crawl if it even made it. He was already anticipating the finish line, the triumphant roar of his engines, the vindication of conventional power. But then a shadow, a grotesque, shuddering shadow that moved with an unnatural, almost disjointed speed through the canyon entrance. The Phoenix. It wasn't flying through the canyon. It was slithering. Elijah had engaged another aspect of his risky technique, a dynamic, controlled oscillation. The helicopter's deliberately unstable tail boom, combined with the asymmetric lift, allowed it to crab sideways with incredible speed, almost scraping the canyon walls, its rotors a blur inches from the rock. It was a horrifying, magnificent display of controlled chaos, a maneuver that defied every textbook on helicopter flight. It looked less like an aircraft and more like a giant, metal insect scuttling through the narrow passage. The ground crew watching the live feed from the control tower gasped. This wasn't just unexpected. It was impossible. Captain Thorne felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Captain Thorne felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. He jammed his thumb onto the comms, his voice tight with an unfamiliar edge. Ground, confirm visual on the chopper in the canyon. What in blazes is it doing? Static crackled back, followed by a breathless, incredulous voice. Confirmed, Raptor 1. It's crabbing, sir. Scuttling. Unbelievable. It's gaining ground. Gaining ground? In a helicopter? Through a canyon designed to highlight a jet's precision? Thorne scoffed, a hollow sound in his helmet. It had to be a trick of the radar, a momentary glitch. No rotary wing aircraft could move like that. It defied physics, defied logic, defied everything he knew about aviation. Yet, on his own HUD, the Phoenix's blip, once a distant, struggling signal, was now a persistent, undeniable presence. It was no longer falling behind. It was closing the gap. The impossible contraption, a patchwork of defiance, was tearing through the canyon like a wounded animal possessed, its twisted tail boom whipping from side to side, not as a sign of instability, but as a deliberate, controlled weapon. Elijah, a blur of focused intensity in the Phoenix's cockpit, was a conductor orchestrating chaos. He wasn't fighting the helicopter's inherent damage. He was dancing with it, coaxing it into maneuvers that would tear apart any conventional aircraft. The asymmetric lift, once a theoretical concept, now manifested as a violent, controlled lean, allowing the Phoenix to hug the canyon walls with a reckless abandon that made the camera operators on the ground flinch. Dust and loose rock exploded in its wake as the main rotor blades, spinning with their calculated imperfection, sliced through the air with a hungry, guttural roar. It wasn't elegant, it was primal. It was a mechanical equivalent of a brawler, ugly but brutally effective. Thorn pushed the raptor harder, his own powerful engines screaming in protest, but the canyon's narrow confines limited his options. He couldn't unleash the jet's full speed without risking a catastrophic collision. He had to fly clean, precise, textbook. And the Phoenix, that monstrous, beautiful aberration, was making a mockery of every textbook ever written. It was slithering, its body tilting at angles that seemed to defy gravity, its unconventional movements allowing it to shave precious seconds off the canyon run. Thorn cursed under his breath, his frustration a bitter taste. He was flying a multi-million-dollar war machine, the apex predator of the skies, and he was being outmaneuvered by a junkyard dog. The humiliation was a cold, creeping sensation worse than any physical blow. As the Phoenix burst from the canyon's mouth, it was no longer a distant speck. It was a tangible threat, a grotesque silhouette against the setting sun, pulling even with the raptor. The crowd, initially roaring for the jet, had fallen into a stunned silence, then erupted into a cacophony of bewildered cheers and gasps. This wasn't just a race anymore. It was a spectacle, an affront to everything they thought they knew. The Phoenix, with its scarred fuselage and defiant spirit, was mocking the sleek, arrogant power of the jet. Thorn, his face a mask of disbelief, hammered the throttle. This was the final straightaway, the long sprint to the finish line. This was where the Raptor's raw, unadulterated speed would finally assert its dominance. He could feel the jet surge forward, its engines reaching for their absolute maximum, the G-forces pinning him back once more. He watched the Phoenix on his radar, fully expecting it to fall back, to finally succumb to the inevitable physics of a helicopter against a jet. But Elijah had one more trick, one more audacious gamble. The Phoenix, instead of simply trying to match the jet's speed, began a series of unpredictable, high-speed lateral shifts. It didn't fly straight. It weaved, a drunken dance across the sky, its twisted tail boom now acting as a rudder for horizontal thrust, its asymmetric lift system generating bursts of side-to-side momentum. It was like trying to hit a target that refused to follow a predictable trajectory. Thorn found himself constantly adjusting, his perfectly calculated flight path disrupted. He tried to anticipate Elijah's moves, but there was no pattern, no logic to the Phoenix's flight. It was pure improvisation, a mechanical jazz solo played at supersonic speeds. The jet, for all its immense power, was being forced to react to the helicopter's unconventional rhythm, losing its own flow, its own effortless grace. Thorn's co-pilot, usually stoic, let out an involuntary gasp. "He's making us bleed speed, sir. We can't maintain optimal course with these evasive maneuvers." Thorn knew it. Each frantic correction, each sudden shift of the stick was costing him precious fractions of a second, burning through his fuel faster, disrupting the jet's aerodynamic purity. The Phoenix wasn't just flying. It was actively interfering a smaller, uglier, but infinitely more cunning opponent. It was like trying to outrun a rattlesnake that kept darting across your path, forcing you to break stride. The jet's superior speed was being rendered irrelevant by a chaotic, unpredictable dance. Elijah, his eyes fixed on the horizon, felt the Phoenix groan around him, every rivet, every patch of metal vibrating with intense strain. He was pushing it beyond what anyone thought possible, beyond what even he had dared to dream. The controls were alive in his hands, a direct extension of his will, translating his audacious vision into defiant reality. He wasn't just flying. He was communicating with the machine, a silent dialogue of trust and sheer stubbornness. The phoenix was a creature of the desert, born of brokenness, and it was showing the gleaming titan of the sky what true grit looked like. Thorn, sweat trickling down his temples, watched in horrified fascination as the phoenix, still performing its chaotic, unpredictable dance, actually began to edge ahead. Not by much, but enough. Enough to be undeniable. The finish line was now visible, a stark white line painted on the distant tarmac. And the phoenix, the crippled helicopter, was leading. The roar of the crowd was no longer a general rumble. It was a distinct, rising wave of sound, a testament to the impossible. Thorn felt a surge of panic, raw and visceral. His training, his experience, his advanced technology, none of it mattered. He was being outsmarted, outmaneuvered by a mechanic and his Frankenstein's monster. The mighty raptor, the embodiment of modern aerial supremacy, was being humiliated. The mighty raptor, the embodiment of modern aerial supremacy, was being humiliated. Then, a profound silence descended, not a lack of sound, but a heavy, resonant quiet that swallowed the last echoes of the jet's engines. The crowd, which moments before had been a roaring tidal wave of expectation, now stood transfixed, a collective gasp caught in their throats. The phoenix, its patched frame vibrating with the ghost of its impossible speed, settled onto the tarmac, a defiant sigh escaping its modified engines. It wasn't a triumphant landing. It was a return, a quiet assertion of victory. Elijah, his body aching from the sheer physical and mental strain, slowly unstrapped himself. He didn't leap out, didn't pump his fist in the air. Instead, he emerged from the cockpit with the quiet dignity of a craftsman finishing a masterpiece. He walked towards the phoenix, its metal still warm beneath the cooling desert air, and placed a hand on its scarred fuselage. It was a silent conversation, a moment of deep understanding between man and machine, a shared triumph whispered without words. The phoenix hummed faintly under his touch, as if acknowledging the bond, the impossible journey they had just completed together. Across the airfield, the raptor, its once arrogant gleam now muted, retreated. Captain Thorn, his face pale beneath his visor, could only watch the crippled helicopter, his mind struggling to reconcile what he had just witnessed with everything he knew to be true. The smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by a bewildered respect, a dawning realization that some victories are not won by brute force alone, but by a spirit that dares to rewrite the rules. The jet's ground crew, usually so boisterous, packed up their equipment in uncharacteristic silence, their earlier jokes now hollow and forgotten. This wasn't just a race. It was a testament to the boundless potential of human ingenuity, a defiant roar against the comfortable conformity of established norms. It proved that true strength isn't always visible, that the most profound power often lies in the audacious spirit that looks at what is broken and sees not an end, but a radical new beginning. Elijah and the Phoenix had shown the world that perceived limitations can be the greatest catalyst for innovation, that the underdog, armed with a vision and unwavering conviction, can indeed make the mighty bow. Sometimes, the most broken things hold the greatest capacity to defy expectation, not despite their flaws, but because of the audacious spirit that dares to mend them differently. If this story of defying the odds ignited something in you, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more tales of extraordinary triumphs.